Howdy, I'm Brandon and welcome to the 80's Emporium, your home for everything 80's. Do you remember the good old days of movies? You know when you could walk into your local theater and there weren't 15 different versions of the same superhero movie playing? That's right, I'm talking about the golden age of cinema, when there were 15 different versions of the same Western movie playing. Well, unless you're over the age of 60, you probably don't remember that. Westerns, defined as films that are set between 1850 and 1924 in the United States Wild West, were Hollywood's first major cash cow. They dominated the box office until the 1960s, when their popularity slowly declined until they finally hit rock bottom in the 1980s. But despite the lack of interest from audiences, some brave 80s filmmakers still tried their hand at the genre, with mixed results. So in honor of these daring gunslingers, let's talk about the Westerns in the 1980s, the good, the bad, and the 3D. First on our list is The Long Riders, which tells the story of the Jesse James gang and their eventual downfall. Director Walter Hill took a lot of inspiration from the stylized violence of Sam Peckinpah, who achieved fame as the writer-director of The Wild Bunch. A nail-biter of a knife fight and the slow-mo final shootout were the highlights of this gritty film. Walter Hill added his own flair by casting 4 famous pairs of Hollywood brothers as the leads in the film: the Carradines, the Keaches, the Guest, and the Quaids. After his 5-time Oscar-winning masterpiece, The Deer Hunter, director Michael Cimino was given a blank check by United Artists for his next film. And man, did he use it. United Artists sunk $40 million in the production of his passion project, Heaven's Gate. But the gamble didn't pay off. Audiences and critics tore it to shreds for its long runtime and slow pace. Many people blamed Heaven's Gate for the decline of the Western, but in truth, there were several reasons why the genre fell off its horse. The first was simple: cost. Westerns, by their nature, were period pieces. They required vast sets that, in many cases, had to be built from the ground up. Period clothing and weapons weren't cheap either.
Seize him!
And while you didn't have to worry about expensive picture cars, you did have to worry about horses. Lots of horses. Aside from the cost of housing and feeding the animals, producers also had to spend valuable time and money training actors to ride them safely. Another factor was the rise of the Western on television. At the height of its popularity in 1959, there were 26 Western shows airing in prime time. And remember, there were only 3 networks back then. So it's understandable why American audiences may have grown tired of the genre. The early Westerns told stories of good versus evil, white hat versus black hat. Audiences admired those rough and tumble heroes for taking on the rest of the world with nothing but their grit. Our nation's history was brought under scrutiny in a time of global destabilization and a number of wars that many deemed questionable. We started to see events from others' points of view, but the legend of the American cowboy turned from black and white to shades of gray. And finally, in the wake of all this change, filmmakers took the heroes, the villains, and the motifs of the Western genre and gave them a sleek new paint job: space. Star Trek and Star Wars led the charge of intergalactic space adventures that stole the reins from the Western, even though the two genres shared much of the same storytelling DNA. Coming at Ya was the first and only 3D Western of the 1980s. As for what exactly would come at you when you watch this film, anything and everything, including snakes, guns, beans, bats, rats, swords, gold coins, a bowling ball, apple peels, flaming arrows, and a baby's bottom for some reason. Producer Tony Anthony wanted to make a fun movie that literally popped off the screen as a tribute to the 3D films of the 1950s. It's now credited with starting the 3D craze in the early 1980s. If you're enjoying our channel, the best way to support us is to buy some of our super rad 80s merch from our online store at 80'semporium.com. And remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we post new content. Returning to the genre that made him an icon after a 9-year hiatus, Clint Eastwood directed and starred in the 1985 film Pale Rider. He drew once more from Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns to play another man with no name. This time, he faced off against a conniving landowner looking to take over a small gold mining town. Lawrence Kasdan, another film industry veteran, co-wrote some small films you might have heard of, such as Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. Silverado was his attempt to write and direct a Western, but Kasdan wasn't able to reach the level of success he had with those previous projects. The movie was created as a loving tribute to the classic Hollywood Western, but instead it was criticized for being unoriginal. However, the film set would have an even more lasting impact than the movie itself. The set was reused in several films, including 3:10 to Yuma, Walker, Texas Ranger, Wild Wild West, and even 2011's Thor. Three Amigos was one of the three major Western spoofs in the 1980s. It starred comedy titans Steve Martin and Chevy Chase, along with SNL alum Martin Short. The story, about three actors who are mistaken for heroic gunfighters, was written by Martin, SNL producer Lorne Michaels, and composer Randy Newman. His only credited screenplay, by the way. Looking for a gift for someone special? If so, you can now find our very own Stu Pollard on Cameo, where he is raising money for Trunacy.org. He'll happily create a personalized message of this day in pop culture history retrospective for you or your loved one. If you like your Westerns a little more dangerous, then look no further than Near Dark, Oscar-winning director Kathryn Bigelow's debut film, which features blood-sucking monsters in the Wild Wild West. We covered this movie in our Halloween horror episode, so check that out to learn more about this cult classic. Jesse James got the Hollywood treatment with The Long Riders, and Billy the Kid got his turn in the spotlight with Young Guns. While this action-packed revenge tale didn't break any new thematic ground, it was still hailed as the most true-to-life depiction of Billy the Kid ever put to screen. Emilio Estevez outshined his Brat Pack counterparts to give a searing performance as the trigger-happy outlaw. The film was successful enough to earn a sequel, Young Guns 2, in 1990. While Western films struggled in the 1980s, the decade ended with an epic Western miniseries that is still beloved today. Lonesome Dove featured screen titans Robert Duvall, Tommy Lee Jones, Diane Lane, and Danny Glover at the height of their powers in a sweeping tale of the American frontier. Writer William D. Whitliff and director Simon Windsor perfectly balanced the action of the story with the theme of moving on from the Old West into an unknown future. Much like it's probably unfair to say Heaven's Gate killed the Western, it's hard to say that Lonesome Dove single-handedly saved it. But the 90s Western enjoyed significantly more success than the 80s. Back to the Future Part 3 and City Slickers dominated at the box office, while Dances with Wolves and Unforgiven won Best Picture in 1990 and 1992, becoming the first Westerns to do so since Cimarron did in 1930. Nowadays, the Western is still often referred to as a dead genre, but the 80s proved there was still a place for these movies in the modern era. In fact, many recent Western films have enjoyed both critical and commercial acclaim. Directors such as Quentin Tarantino and the Coen brothers have achieved mainstream success in the Western space. Paramount's Western Rango won Best Animated Feature at the 2012 Oscars. TV shows like Westworld and The Walking Dead became popular by blending the Western with sci-fi and horror elements. And even Heaven's Gate, one of the most hated films of its time, has since garnered praise by modern-day critics. So while it's unlikely that the Western will ever dominate the box office like it did in the mid-20th century, the so-called dead genre isn't quite ready to ride off into the sunset just yet.
That's horseshit.
No, it's the truth.
No, that's horseshit.
Whoa, oh, that is horseshit. Okay.
Now I want to hear from you. What's your favorite 80s Western? Did we miss any of your favorites? Comment below. Be sure to follow us on social media. Use the hashtag 80s Emporium. Thanks for watching.
Night, Lucky. Night, Dusty.
Good night, Ned.
Good night, Ned.
Good night, Ned.